this film has really good family appeal. The robot characters, as stiff and cartoonish as they look, are actually really good fun in this movie if you embrace your inner child. The brutal Maximilian says nothing and speaks only through actions, such as attacking people with razor-sharp blenders, which is pretty interesting being that the threat of the movie is a spinning black hole in space that threatens to tear apart any human who enters. And yes, I do think Maximilian's blades are an intended parallel with the black hole. The robot Vincent and his battered sidekick Bob, they may have big cartoonishly corny eyes, but they have plenty of personality for robots. They are clearly there to appeal to children, and on that level they work very well. Complaining about them is like complaining that the Scarecrow, Tin Man and Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz are too childish in appearance. The unrealism is what makes those characters work. Like those three Dorothy sidekicks, and like the central droid characters of Star Wars, Vincent and Bob often seem to have more emotions than their human companion characters, and arguably they're only robots on the surface plot level. Kids love animal and robot characters, especially ones with big baby-like eyes, because those characters serve as a psychological other for the child viewer to project their fears and anxieties. This is a family film, but with a lot of very dark moments, including a lot of death, but that's all balanced out for family viewing by the cartoonish elements. On that basis, Bob is squashed into a permanent expression of fear, and he shakes with anxiety from time to time. His death scene has plenty of emotional impact for kids. The movie is partially about the black hole void as death itself, so having one of these two robots die is sort of a gentle presentation of death that kids can emotionally handle better. It's so easy to underestimate this. A major facet of early childhood development is becoming aware of death and coming to terms emotionally with its inevitability. And fiction stories, including cartoons and family movies, these play an essential role in death awareness development for kids. As for the very popular Vincent robot, he even has ESP communication abilities. I can't think of any other movie where a robot has ESP, so that's unusual. These living robot implications are important, and we'll come back to them much later in terms of deeper themes. I really think a lot of adult viewers today need to stop demanding fake realism and fake moodiness in family movies. They need to embrace the notion that kids can come along for the ride too. That is the adult, mature and realistic attitude to have when watching a family movie. But these days, filmmakers seem to be terrified of making their films child-friendly in case adults get turned off by it. But there's nothing wrong with making a movie that has stuff for kids and adults in turns. As I've said in other videos, the James Bond franchise did this brilliantly for decades, until they abandoned children and started making miserable, angry, cynical, thuggish Bond films with boring plots, frankly, as if that constitutes realism, maturity and artistic integrity. Which it doesn't. It certainly doesn't make those films more sophisticated or intelligent. In fact, it takes them in the opposite direction. Critics claimed upon release that The Black Hole, in trying to appeal to intellectuals and to children, failed in both, but I really disagree with them. A good example of how the movie balances the two audience appeals is that the dialogue-heavy scene of Reinhardt giving a dinner speech about his ambitions to fly his ship into the black hole and hopefully make discoveries beyond the known universe, that's too intellectual and too wordy for young kids. And so it's intercut several times with a childish fun scene of the robots, Vincent and Bob, attending a laser shooting gallery and competing against the ship's sinister robot guards. Child and adult viewers are kept engaged via this interplay. But I also think that works at the individual level. Each adult viewer has a kid inside of them who enjoys childish fun, though often they're too proud of their adult identification to embrace the inner child, and so I often hear adults talk affectionately about the robot scenes of this movie as being memorable. Especially, they often talk about the character Vincent. Okay, so that's some very basic positives about the movie, and I've avoided going into the deeper themes which we'll really go into in the second half of this video. First of all, though, let's look in detail at the general critical and science community reaction to this film, which is quite bizarre in places, and itself prompted me to make a criminally underrated movies episode. At the go-to site for limited insight reviews and extreme bias toward new releases, Rotten Tomatoes, of which the site name itself screams negativity, The Black Hole currently holds a 38% rating among critics, but has a slightly higher 45% audience rating. However, that's not really an audience rating, because only site-approved critical sources are allowed to submit reviews in either category. As is often the case with criminally underrated movies, the Internet Movie Database, which allows for a much wider range of people to give ratings, and to give an actual score rating instead of a reductionist thumbs up or down, as well as allowing much longer text reviews to be written, Internet Movie Database gives a much higher overall rating of The Black Hole at 5.9 or 59%. That's not a huge endorsement, but it's a lot better than 38%. From what I can tell, these ratings are generally dragged down for two reasons. First, The Black Hole does have some undeniable flaws in its execution, so not many people are likely to give this film a 9 out of 10 rating. Personally, I'd give it a 7 or 8 out of 10. Probably I'd lean closer to an 8. And second, the film's most blatant flaws are of the kind that some reviewers are unable to see past, and so they miss the better aspects of the film almost entirely and give it a really low rating, which in turn drags the overall rating down quite far. One of those perceived deep flaws is the film's lack of scientific plausibility. This is an area where The Black Hole has been very unfairly treated by critics. Classic sci-fi films like The Matrix, Star Wars, The Fly and The Thing, those are just as physically unrealistic as The Black Hole is, even though the visuals are more convincing to look at. But because critics mostly haven't looked into the science on those movie subjects, they don't spot the science unrealism so easily. With all those movies, and in The Black Hole, scientific unrealism actually provides a gateway to understanding the film on a deeper level. If you're willing to consider it all symbolically, instead of asking why is the black hole itself not convincing to look at in this film, critics should be asking what does the black hole symbolise in this story? Like all science fiction, The Black Hole is only a science movie on the surface. It's actually about psychological things, not the physical realm. And we will be delving deep into the symbolic structure later, as well as getting some much needed additional context regarding the claims made about black holes by physicists. For now though, the worst element of critical response to The Black Hole is this. Oversimplistic historical assessment of science fiction movies tends to focus on Star Wars as if it pretty much invented science fiction movies, but sci-fi had already been big business for decades pre-1977. And most of what is in Star Wars Wars from robots to laser battles already existed in the genre pre-1977. Flash Gordon, The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, the first Star Trek TV series, Forbidden Planet, 2001: A Space Odyssey, sci-fi was already massive, and it still would have grown a lot bigger even if Star Wars hadn't been made. For one thing, improvements in practical special effects were destined to give the genre a massive boost. The same is true conceptually. The variety of sci-fi we've had since Star Wars is clearly not limited to that single influential source. We've had Alien, Tron, The Terminator, The Fly, Blade Runner, E.T., The Matrix, RoboCop, The Thing, Predator, The Abyss, Total Recall, They Live. These movies have fresh ideas of their own. The black hole has its own traits that have nothing to do with Star Wars, a basic one being that there were no black holes in Star Wars, and Star Wars didn't have a dimension jump ending left wide open to interpretation. In fact, to my knowledge, the black hole was the very first fiction movie to actually have a black hole as a prominent plot feature. Black holes did get a mention in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which was released in the same month in 1979, but in that movie, it was only a passing dialogue reference. So if we want to get sucked into the this movie ripped off that movie mentality, we could falsely argue that movies like the monumentally dull Interstellar and the horror movie Event Horizon, we could argue that those movies ripped off the black hole. But to do that would be to ignore the differences in those movies too. However, if there's one thing that pretty much demolishes the idea that the black hole was a Star Wars ripoff, it's the fact that the story was first conceived in 1972 to tie in with the popularity of disaster movies at the time, like The Towering Inferno. Multiple script drafts had already been written before Star Wars was released. Some have compared the black hole with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the villain being a space version of Captain Nemo, and the comparison is noteworthy, especially with the signature ship looking somewhat like an ocean vessel in space. But again, the reductionist analogy ignores the differences between the two stories. There's also an element of old-school westerns in the black hole, the shooting gallery scenes, the rough Texan-sounding Bob robot, and the name of the smaller ship, the Palomino, referencing a type of horse. Like with any movie, there's lots of traceable influences. Getting back to the overall history of science fiction, with so many classic movies of the genre now held in high esteem, and Star Wars being overestimated in its conceptual influence, many worthwhile sci-fi movies have undeservedly disappeared down the public memory orifice, and one of those movies is the very unique The Black Hole. I'm old enough to remember this film being a commercial success when I was a young kid, to the point where black hole toys and merchandise were very popular. But today the movie is almost universally looked upon by reductionists as little more than a failed Star Wars cash-in, and some go a step further and call it a failed Star Wars meets 2001: A Space Odyssey hybrid that can't decide whether it's a movie for adults or kids. At the same time, the critics didn't like the superb Star Trek The Motion Picture, and that was released in the very same month as The Black Hole. Critics considered that movie to be too cerebral and complained it didn't have enough action, laser battles and kiddie fun. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, it seems. As a side note, the very close proximity release of Star Trek The Motion Picture no doubt reduced the box office takings of The Black Hole. Star Trek had an established audience from its TV show, but The Black Hole was a new player on the market. Nevertheless, The Black Hole did make a profit right in the middle of one of the most fiercely competitive years in cinema history. 1979 was swimming in great movie releases, like Apocalypse Now, The Warriors, Salem's Lot, Escape from Alcatraz, etc., etc. And the competition in the realm of science fiction alone was fierce. Alien, Moonraker, and of course Star Trek. Today there are several lengthy articles and videos giving detailed breakdowns of the physical production history of The Black Hole, mainly relating to the fact that it was a conceptual change of direction for Disney, and there are nostalgia interviews featuring several voices from the production, but from what I've seen, most of the available studies don't put much effort into exploring the themes of the film. There's a conceptual black hole with regards to what this movie is really about. The muddled production history doesn't help for identifying themes either. Lots of production collaborators taking their turns, chucking their ideas into the conceptual pot before being replaced by new collaborators. Now some consider that to be a sign of a bad movie, but it was also true of The Wizard of Oz and Alien. Those are classic movies that didn't come from a single auteur's vision, and are still loved by new audiences today. Okay, so that's an overall look at the critical reactions that have occurred over the years. But to play devil's advocate, I'm now going to delve into my own personal views of the film's flaws, of which there are some quite severe ones that can't be ignored. And once all that negative stuff is out the way, we'll explore the really good stuff, the spiritual and psychological themes. The first major flaw I see in the film, and it's arguably the worst flaw, is the dialogue and acting. Especially in the first half hour of the film, where characters just seem to say stuff to inform us of the plot.
The most destructive force in the universe, Harry. Nothing can escape it, not even light.
USS Cygnus. Its mission to discover habitable life in outer space. Same as ours.
But Alex, how can a lifeless derelict defy that kind of gravity?
The cast includes proven reliables such as Anthony Perkins, famous for playing Norman Bates in Psycho, Ernest Borgnine, who had outstanding roles in movies like The Vikings and The Dirty Dozen, Robert Forster, who'd already had several critically acclaimed roles. There's also Roddy McDowall providing unique voice dubbing for the robot character Vincent.
There are three basic types, Mr. Pizer: the wills, the won'ts, and the can'ts. The wills accomplish everything, the won'ts oppose everything, and the can'ts won't try anything.
And there's Maximilian Schell playing the villain of the story. He already had dozens of films to his credit and was highly respected. So the casting of The Black Hole drew in a lot of talent, and yet most of the characters in the final film feel stale, undeveloped, even boring. With the exception of Maximilian Schell in the role of the evil genius Dr. Hans Reinhardt, whose dialogue was written with a bit more flair, the human characters in this film are pretty much upstaged by the clunky-looking robot characters. And from what I can tell, this is partially due to generic dialogue in which the human characters mostly just describe plot events instead of expressing whatever unique personal traits each of them might have. But I also suspect it's due to director Gary Nelson not drawing out the best performances from the talent available. This is strange because Nelson had directed a star cast for a TV movie about Watergate, and it was really well received. I've not seen it myself, but Stanley Kubrick of all people had recommended Nelson's TV show to actor Maximilian Schell, and he then ended up playing Reinhardt in The Black Hole. So I'm not saying Nelson was generally bad at directing actors. He was an experienced director, but for some reason a lot of the acting in The Black Hole looks as if it was a 1 or 2 take deal, perhaps even without the benefit of sufficient rehearsals. It's possible that the shooting schedule didn't really allow for many takes, but then producers should ensure that such time is available. But some of it is definitely due to the script. For example, in dramatic situations, the characters often crack feeble jokes that go against the supposed danger of the situation. When the Palomino ship is being pulled toward the black hole at the start of the movie, it would be terrifying for the characters, and yet those characters say stuff like this.
Never rains.
I got through to Vincent. He said there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are very few old, bold pilots.
She's tuned in on Vincent, all right?
And this happened to an extent in Star Wars too, but the joke lines were better, and the likes of Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, somehow they managed to carry that humour with conviction. Another area that is problematic for the movie is special effects. Some of the pre-CGI visuals are incredible and darkly dramatic, but they're also inconsistent. For every great effect shot in the film, there's a bad one elsewhere. But it's also important to be aware that the best special effects are not always the ones that look the most real. Stop-motion animation is a great example of how unrealistic effects can induce aesthetic responses from viewers that a realistic image might not achieve. The title sequence of The Black Hole is a perfect example of this. The software used to generate this meshscape is laughably ancient these days, but at the same time this is still an attention-grabbing and impactful sequence. The increasing speed of the spin is dizzying, and the slight jerkiness of the grid movement suggests the apparent infinite render distance is too much for a computer simulation to handle. That's weirdly effective. Something else that I think is psychologically important here is the unknown sense of scale. Just how big is each square of that grid? A metre? A mile? Or even a million miles per square? We don't know the scale. And another dizzying feature of the sequence is a slight mismatch between the tilting of the grid and the changing orientation of the stars. They mismatch in speed, and when the grid rotates on its side, the stars rotate in the opposite direction. As we begin spiraling into the tunnel, the stars should be moving across rapidly to the right, but they're moving slowly, which gives the feeling that the grid and tunnel are spinning themselves, not just us spinning toward it. This TV ad for the film uses only the grid sequence and no other scene clips. With the alternate, darker music and sound effects used here, the whirlpool effect feels even more uncomfortable.
Now, man is about to enter the black hole.
So I think the crude graphic title sequence is just as effective today as it was back in 1979. I never did see the film in the cinema, but I bet this was creepy as hell on the big screen, especially the cinema plunging into darkness here at the end. Another example of how unrealistic effects help this film is that in many shots the blackness of space has a milky bluish glow to it. First of all, it's a unique visual style for the space shots, and second, both the black hole and the silhouette of the Cygnus are more perceptible. Now, I'm not making excuses at all for the film's special effects limitations. Poor quality blue screen compositing ruins many shots for me. The film grain and colour temperatures often mismatch severely. Panning about this set on the Palomino, the stars seen through the windows are obviously just a foot or so. Behind the glass, not way off in the distance. And yet, the Cygnus ship looks fantastic, both when it's panned over by spotlight and when it lights up. The Cygnus exteriors really stand out as high-quality special effects work. Look at this thruster effect as well. That's pre-CGI, it's pretty good. In other moments, there are very jerky movement effects of the Palomino ship, such as this. And yet this impact explosion looks brilliant. This shot of the tramline vehicle spinning around is clearly an effort to convey the idea of spinning into the black hole, but the effects here are very poor. The Meteor approach point perspective is totally wrong, clearly superimposed, but then we get this crowd pleaser effect. And having the tunnel now dark so that only the Meteor glow lights everything, that's really good. The stiff-legged guard robots are easy to laugh at, but they're strangely memorable, acting very different to stormtroopers. The effects of these robots being killed in laser battles are a mixed bag. Some look fairly good, replacing the actors with mannequin versions that break apart. The hospital fight and the bridge fight I consider weak because the hero music mismatches the lack of triumph against such lame enemies. With this moment of the guard robots blocking the hall in sentry positions with moodier music, I think this works better. This moment also seems to relate back to the shooting gallery scene, our heroes now being the equivalent of the floating ball targets that the robots have been trained to shoot. This fight in the ship garden works better as well, the music being replaced by alarms, that sort of emotionally helps the scene, and the suddenly faster walking of the robots is unexpected, along with the environmental change from the rest of the ship, and the double threat of having a laser battle while the air is also being sucked out through the roof. The control room set is very memorable, even though some of the shots have bad compositing of exterior space, and the major problem in several shots for me is the depth of field mismatch between window frames and the stars outside. What I mean by that is there are some shots where the foreground characters are in focus and background window frames are out of focus, and yet through those window frames the stars are in focus. So you have the foreground and extreme distance in focus, with the middle ground being out of focus, and that's impossible. There's loads of collapsing set footage, and some of it looks great, and some of it just looks like flimsy cardboard set shaking. Generally, some of it just looks like loads of collapsing, and that's impossible in focus. So you have, and yet through those window frames, extreme distance stars are in focus, middle ground. You have, and yet through foreground window frames, extreme distance in focus, with the middle ground, there's loads of collapsed cardboard set shaking. Generally, for today's OCD visual polish tastes, many of the effects in the black hole simply don't meet the minimum requirement. However, if the black hole were polished up with some CGI touches and colour correction, I think a lot of the worst effects in it could be elevated to acceptable levels for today's audiences. When they did it with Star Wars, why did they try the black hole? Now let's get into what is currently the most criticised aspect of the film, its scientific implausibility. I'm going to spend some time on this because it's very interesting. Common critiques of the film include the visibility of the black hole itself, which is blue in distant shots and red when centered instead of being black. There's the apparent impossibility of a human being able to pass through a black hole without being physically torn apart or squashed by the intense gravitational pull. There seems characters being able to breathe outside the confines of their ship, as if the black hole has a warm and breathable oxygen atmosphere. That's a really bad one from a science point of view. And yet for some reason critics never seem to complain that in Star Wars and Star Trek, pretty much every planet the human characters visit has a warm, breathable airtight atmosphere and gravitational pull identical to Earth's. In the black hole, I'll add another major break of my own though. As far as I know, black holes are so big it would take a long time to be sucked into one from a distance such as this. It wouldn't happen in minutes. It could take hours, perhaps even days or years, just to get sucked toward and eventually into a black hole. We're talking millions of miles distance in a scenario like this, depending on the size of the black hole. However, for this review, I went and read up on the first ever on the first ever black hole discovered, which is called Cygnus X1. It was discovered about 15 years before the black hole movie was released, and much to my surprise, artists' depictions of this very first episode of black hole show it looking similar to what we see in the movie. I always thought black holes were completely black, but apparently Cygnus X1 is caused in a mutual orbit with a very close supergiant star called HDE 226868. A very catchy and easy to remember name, isn't it? Apparently Cygnus X1, black hole, is constantly pulling surface matter away from HDE 226868, and this bright matter then swells its way into the black hole, where it eventually disappears because light can no longer escape. Now all that lends a bit more credibility to the visual swell pictures seen in the movie black hole. The difference is that in the movie there's no twin supergiant star from which the swelling matter is being pulled. I suppose they could have had that in the movie, but it would have visually easy to remember name 226868, a very giant star, surprise, discovered on the first hanging on the as a black hole. However, for this review, I went on the first ever black hole discovered, which is called Cygnus X1. It was discovered about 15 years before the black hole movie was released, and much to my surprise, artists' depictions of this very first orbit with a very black hole is constantly pulling surface matter away from HDE 226868 can no longer escape. Now all that lends a bit more credibility to the visual swell pictures seen in the movie black hole. The big difference is that in the movie there's no twin supergiant star from which the swelling matter is being pulled. I suppose they could have had that in the movie, but it would have visually distracted from the opposing balance of the black hole itself, and it would have required tedious dialogue explanation. Better to just have the black hole on its own on the visual swell. After all, the movie isn't intended to be a science lesson, it's fiction drama, and the patch of black is much less interesting than dramatic order. Something that personally did consider ridiculously unrealistic in the film is that the spin of black hole could be seen in real time. My assumption was that in tiny time span of human life, the spiral rotation of matter into Cygnus X1 wouldn't be detectable to human eye, just as our galaxy is rotating, but such a slow rate appears to be completely still in a human life time frame. But apparently Cygnus X1 and the accompanying supergiant star HDE 226868 rotate around their mutual axis every 6 hours. That seems to be very fast considering we orbit the sun once a year. So who knows, maybe the dragging of matter into Cygnus X1 would be noticeable and moving slow in real time. In all the critical reviews I've read attacking this movie's scientific realism, I've heard any reviewer make the most cursory mention of similar artist depictions of Cygnus X1, the very first actual black hole discovered. And the filmmakers were almost certainly aware of it because the villain spaceship in the movie is called the Cygnus. One public voice that responds to the film as being the most scientifically unrealistic he's ever seen is physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson.
What is the most scientifically inaccurate speaking? Oh, the original Disney movie black hole. Somebody must have decided, I know better than a scientist. Time for some medical stretch your body, head to toe. There's a word for that. Spaghettification. Don't get me started about that.
That's quite an overstatement, so the result is more accurate scientifically. Tyson claims that being sucked into a black hole, human would be squashed and stretched as if they were a piece of spaghetti. However, spaghettification in a black hole, as far as I know, is a theory. We don't really know what happens inside black holes because gravitational forces seemingly give out virtually no observable information for us to measure, hence the light can't escape. But there are also some scientists who claim black holes don't exist. For all we know, black holes might just be compressed spheres of matter like the sun is, but we don't call the sun a white hole, do we? Maybe the term black hole would be accurate black hole. So maybe the science community itself doesn't interpret black holes with that very label. Other scientists debate about black holes cause us to actually vanish from our universe, which would throw the perceived laws of physics out the window. Some theorize that suspended matter is conserved and reappears elsewhere, though where we don't know. My own non-physicist thought that the so-called black holes may be related to what physicists call dark matter and dark energy. Aspects of reality which fall outside what goes on in instruments detect, but also use as placeholder concepts to fill gaps in how the universe doesn't match current physical laws of reality. A previous placeholder concept before that was very popular called the ether, and apparently that's now been disproved, not sure how, that's the claim. So in other words, my theory is that just as the sun is constantly projecting its matter back out into the cosmos in the form of light and maybe other kinds of energy waves, black holes might also be conserving and projecting matter back out into the universe, but in a dark matter or dark energy form that we are currently unable to detect. As far as I know, black holes or black holes, black spheres, or whatever they are, is a very difficult science. 43 years after the release of the black hole movie, most black hole science remains unproven theory. Most of it is theoretical mathematical models and actual observation. For example, one theory suggests that the Big Bang that apparently creates our universe was a white hole emerging from a black hole in our parent universe. But for all we know, that could be a delusional flat earth theories. Some people like Neil deGrasse Tyson say they hate this movie based on its mismatching largely theoretical science, it's full of fancy speculation, and he did say he hates it. I think those people being very pragmatic. Some scientists, including Tyson, say that time itself and basic so-called laws of physics break down inside a black hole. First of all, how does he know that? Second of all, if that's true, then physicists are effectively disguising their own theories. So gasification might not happen if the perceived laws of physics no longer apply. Tyson even claims. You might say, how can that doesn't make sense? The universe is under no obligation. It makes sense. Anyways. And yes, he says he hates the black hole movie because it doesn't make sense within his theoretical opinion of black holes. If you can believe this logically, it would make more sense to him. In this video, discussing subjective theories from the computer graphics simulation, there's no more convincing than what we see in the black hole movie. So we get that right. It's okay for science documentaries to show clearly fake and therefore unrealistic depictions of cosmic phenomena. When a movie is bad, it does the same for the sake of fiction and entertainment drama. And in this video, we talk about black holes leading into wormholes. But that's pure speculation. Wormholes never been observed.
There's
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying black hole movie can take as scientifically plausible. It's got glowing meteors, floating robots, and a spaceship that can magically resist the gravitational pull of a black hole. And many other fanciful, even laughable things. Like Star Wars and Star Trek full science defying realism too. Beam me up static. There are small forms of realism that are common in sci-fi movies. And here's one in the black hole. The protagonist live in a zero gravity environment. Presumably they've been there for months or years. And when they land on Cygnus, they instantly adapt back to full gravity and that's a problem. No weak limbs, no business. And the ship appears to be so small that where's all of their food and water stored? Where are their air tanks? How do they keep the air conditioning? To be honest, it's like they're trying to cross the ocean in a life raft. And the one I find using this film could appreciate the works of Pure Darn well is that as the Palomino approaches Cygnus, it is able to resist the gravitational pull of the black hole. And by the time it floats past Cygnus, which would be maybe a couple of miles, the black hole suddenly looks twice as close. its pull has significantly increased. At this distance, the ship will have to travel thousands or even millions of miles closer to the black hole before a noticeable increase in its size or pull will be detectable. In the film's favor is the fact that these signature ships doesn't have a thick solid hull, the kind that most space movie vehicles do. Because of the emptiness of space, our own actual space vehicles and satellites don't need thick protective hulls generally. There's no air resistance to movements like when a fighter jet moves at high speed through the atmosphere, and there's no ocean waves to be resisted. It's all just free floating regardless of its speed. When it's found on the outside of the spaceship, it won't face any resistance even if the ship moves thousands of miles an hour. According to the production design of these the signature ship takes this into account, with its resulting fragile glass and scaffolding appearance. It's quite unique in movie spacecraft. Here's an example of space realism that is present in virtually every science fiction movie I've ever seen, even in the so-called scientifically plausible films like 2001: Space Odyssey, Apollo 13, Gravity, and Interstellar. Why is the Milky Way, our own galaxy, which we can only see from within its spiral disk, why is it virtually never visible in any space movie? Our own galaxy is always there, but it's always actually tilted because our own solar system is tilted. But actually, that also depends on where on the Earth it's standing. The Milky Way can sometimes be seen on Earth with the naked eye, on vaguely nights out in the country, and especially if it happens in mountains. I've seen it a few times in my life. Our own Milky Way will always be visible from space, even if we travel billions of miles through the far edge of our solar system. The galaxy is so big it wouldn't look like it approached an inch. All space movies, even though set in a galaxy far, far away, should have the Milky Way or an equivalent galaxy visible to whoever is traveling in space. But hardly any science fiction movies show this in their space shots. So how's that for like realism across the board? Last point on realism in space movies illusion. The movie Interstellar was marketed as scientifically accurate, which actually means it just followed mathematical models by scientists, not something that actually properly observed. But in this new science article, it is revealed that the filmmakers intentionally changed their computer simulations to create a depiction of the black hole in the movie that would be more visually appealing and less confusing for audiences. The basic truth is, all that science is strange and irrelevant because sci-fi movies aren't scientific papers. Movies aren't about physical reality. Movies operate in a similar way to our dreams. They are a symbolic reality. Just because a dream is a convincing physical sense once you wake up, that doesn't mean that it lacks positive meaning. Even though surreal and physical reality find dreams can depict important psychological truths, just as a kid's cartoon movie can be deeply symbolic and emotionally effective, even though it's an extreme distortion of the physical world. And so the black hole movie in its entirety should be viewed in the same way the ending is, symbolic. We don't take the ending as literal, do we? It's all metaphor. So viewing the rest of the movie from the same lens, it becomes a lot more interesting and engaging and starts to make a lot more sense. I'll tell you why it's much more important than physical reality in a movie though. It is crucially important that characters have convincing and believable motives and that it shows in their behavior. That's the most important aspect of the movie that needs to be convincing and realistic. So anyway, in my view, I believe I have a great deal of evidence to support this, which I'll shortly present. Black hole movie is primarily a spiritual story. The physical setting of the black hole space is merely a plot device. Right, for the remainder of this video, we'll be delving much deeper into the black hole's symbolic territory, all of which has been described in most of it. In order to do this, I have to engage in plot spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, I suggest you stop the video here, go find a copy of the film, watch it, and enjoy the surprises that come especially the design, which goes strongly against standard Hollywood formula, and especially goes against Disney happy ending formulas at the time, even though this is a Disney produced movie. After you've watched it, go back to this video, watch the forthcoming dramatic breakdown. Right, so continuing into plot spoiler territory in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's continue. One of the most critically fantastic features of this movie is its surreal ending. Our protagonist is sucked into the black hole and ends up with some multi-dimensional experience. Whether that dimension is a dream, a parallel universe, or something else is left to us to decide, being that there's no direct explanation. We have a series of images from which we can either decipher an intended meaning or project meaning of our own. A lot of critics don't like how to figure such things out themselves, and so with the black hole, the frequent reaction has been to twist the ending as cheap rip-off 2001: Space Odyssey ending, even though critics struggle with that ending as well. While I do agree that the legacy 2001 may have given black hole filmmakers the courage to create a symbolic and unexplained ending, I think the meaning of this story is very different. I don't think the black hole's ending is difficult to decipher at all personally. The black hole clearly leads to a spiritual realm, not a physical one. Even though Ellen also recognized this when she recently saw the movie for the first time. Watching the surreal ending, she said at this moment in which Reinhardt melts with his own killer robot called the Chameleon and seeing him in flames, she said, "He's gone to hell." That's a simple example of how a viewer who's open to the spiritual and psychological can actually see what is on screen and recognize the very basic symbolic meaning, whereas a high IQ adult physicist like Neil deGrasse Tyson is blinded by material science expectation. Following 5 hell shots, the rest of the ending sequence clearly depicts the opposite of hell. The good guy protagonist encountering a destination of spiritual light. The old light at the end of the tunnel was a metaphor for the spiritual spiritual. Following 5 blinded by material high IQ adult and recognize the very basic symbolic meaning, whereas a high IQ adult physicist like Neil deGrasse Tyson is blinded by material science expectation. Following 5 hell shots, the rest of the ending sequence clearly depicts the opposite of hell. The good guy protagonist encountering a destination of spiritual light. The old light at the end of the tunnel was a metaphor for the spirit passing from physical death to the afterlife. The presence of transparent angel-like figure leading the way to emergence is obviously spiritual indicator as well. And the unspecified wellhead is clearly a destination for our travelers, past the music suggesting the destination is one of salvation or even paradise. So given the black hole leads to the twin realms of heaven and hell, or whatever equivalent labels you want to use, then the black hole itself is a portal to the afterlife. In other words, the black hole is physical death itself. Quite appropriate given that we associate darkness with the void of death. Even without watching the ending, the movie is already full of symbolic clues relating to this theme. Let's explore some chronological examples. The title sequence that goes to the music played against a geometric depiction of the twin reality separated by an endless horizon. We flip from one side of the horizon to the other and back again. As we fall into a geometric depiction of the black hole tunnel, the stars disappear. We can take it out into the physical universe. Once the first dialogue sequence is called the Palmiotia, and we get multiple references to the black hole itself as a spiritual entity.
My God, why not Dante's Inferno?
Dante's Inferno involves the protagonist who travels through the 9 cycles of hell. Our protagonist here will pass through hell when he enters the black hole, so that's a very obvious dialogue reference. John's following statement can be argued to refer to death itself as the black hole.
The most destructive force in the universe, I think, state that might be
And we can't escape death either. Kate gives an incredibly dark statement for a family film.
I had a professor who predicted that eventually black holes would devour the entire universe.
Why not? You can see giant sun sucked in and disappear without trace. Why not?
That's true.
In a sky.
Black hole. Here will to travel
Dante's
the 9 circles of hell.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Our protagonist here will pass through hell when they enter the black hole, so that's a very obvious dialogue reference. Durant's following statement can be argued to refer as much to death itself as the black hole.
The most destructive force in the universe, I think, can escape it, not even light.
And we can't escape death either. Kate gives an incredibly dark statement for a family film.
I had a professor who predicted that eventually black holes would devour the entire universe.
Why not? When you can see giant sun sucked in and disappear without a trace.
Well, yeah, death gets us all in the end. At the same time, we could consider the surrounding blackness of endless space as being a giant black hole all of its own. In fact, some astrophysicists have suggested that no universe is the interior of a giant black hole. It's known as Schwarzschild cosmology, or perhaps we could call it baby army cosmology. Anyway, the dialogue references to the black hole's spiritual puzzle continue.
Every time I see one of those things, I expect to spot some guy in red with horns and a pitchfork. It's a monster, right?
Yeah, the Red Devil himself with a pitchfork will show up later in the robotic guise of Red, Maximilian, and his swinging pitchfork hands. And something else spiritual sneaks its way into the proceedings alien story. Kate uses ESP to talk to Vincent. The unproven phenomenon of ESP is essentially a form of magic, existing outside the known realms of material science, and this film embraces it, just as Star Wars depicts spiritual sci-fi and mysterious energy known as the Force. But in Star Wars, droids didn't have the Force. So the fact that Vincent, a robot, and others like him can communicate via ESP in this movie is an important detail which we'll return to later on a different theme. As the story goes on, Reinhardt's ship turns out to be a dark technographic
No way.
castle in space complete with the King's Tower. When the whole thing lights up, a reference to Christmas trees is made, a spiritual holiday.
Like a tree on Christmas morning.
Now you might think that's a throwaway line, but the exact line will appear again in one report. Now you might think that's a holiday.
Like a tree on Christmas morning.
Christmas trees is made, a spiritual holiday. When the whole thing lights up, a reference to castle in space complete with the King's Tower. When the whole thing lights up, a reference to Christmas trees is made, a spiritual holiday.
Like a tree on Christmas morning.
Now you might think that's a throwaway line, but the exact line will appear again in one important context later. Opening the ship's bridge where Max and Reinhardt run the show, a display screen shows the Cygnus as a gothic-looking arrow shape against fiery red. So it's like the ship is already in the fires of hell. Reinhardt's mysterious crew are dressed like monks.
They look medieval, but unromantic.
A short while later, the rescue team leader, Captain Holland, stumbles across a funeral, a spiritual event in which the deceased is ejected straight toward the black hole of death itself. Isn't that fitting? Reinhardt and Durant, who is the true member who most buys into his ambition to travel into the black hole, they make a handful of statements about the proposed journey being spiritual rather than scientific.
Our glorious pilgrimage straight into the mind of God.
And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. What are you hoping for, Alex? Immortality?
Good old immortality, one of the great elusive fantasies shared by monks and scientists alike. I guess this fella can't handle getting old, eh? Durant pulls a mask off one of the crew and this fella one
For Alex. Immortality? Waters. What are you And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. What are you hoping for, Alex? Immortality?
Good old immortality, one of the great elusive fantasies shared by monks and scientists alike. I guess this fella can't handle getting old, eh? Durant pulls a mask off one of the crew and discovers him to be a kind of zombified human, a deathly skull face with dark socket makeup and unnaturally large black hole pupils. As the robot Bob said,
This is a death ship.
Durant now snaps out of his belief in Reinhardt's mission and tries to escape with Kate, but he gets minced by Maximilian. And there's an excellent symbolic element to his death. Reinhardt had given Durant a full book of all his scientific formulas in an earlier scene, and Durant had been clinging onto those formulas like they were the Ten Commandments of God. But now he tries to use that book to shield himself against Maximilian's spinning blades, but the blades make mincemeat of the formulas before killing Durant, just as the black hole itself tears apart both the Cygnus and the perceived physical laws of material reality. It's a very good dramatic statement here that's easy to miss.
Yeah. Having to be the spreadsheet guy. Maximilian Shield, too.
Durant then falls into an electrified piss like he's falling into a black hole. These are the kinds of symbols and subtleties that I think a lot of critics have overlooked because they have their Star Wars. These are the kinds of symbols and subtleties that I think a lot of critics
It's the same will.
have overlooked because they have their Star Wars glasses on, or even worse, they have their theoretical physicist glasses on. After Durant's death, Kate equates the black hole to death itself.
If there's any justice at all, the black hole will be your grave.
As we get to the actual journey into the black hole, the fires of hell first show up in the form of hot meteors, which bring their own threat of death. The black hole morphs from the cool blues that we shown us earlier to a hot lava-looking spiral. The ship itself is engulfed in hellish red for the final battle with Max, the devil in robot clothing.
This looks a lot like Ridge War.
The fight ends with Vincent drilling a hole in Max's chest, karma for when he did the same to Durant. And Max screams, the closest thing we ever hear to him having a recognisable voice. Meanwhile, Reinhardt has been crushed by one of his own technical display screens, and as he dies he says, it's all light.
All light.
The room is filling up with bright sparks as the ship is destroyed and slaves are thrown into the pit where Durant fell earlier. But the notion of seeing light in the moment of death, yeah, that's a classic spiritual statement from Reinhardt. Meanwhile, the robot character Bob dies after being shot by Maximilian, so multiple central characters, including Harry, have encountered death as the Cygnus ship enters the death-symbolising black hole. The remaining human survivors and the robot Vincent get into the probe ship and escape the collapsing Cygnus. They spin, and as time is distorted, they hear echoes of dialogue spoken earlier in the film. Interestingly, they hear Reinhardt himself shouting for help, but this isn't a memory because none of them were there to see Reinhardt die.
Help me!
So it seems like his soul is calling out to them. Then Reinhardt is heard saying the word life. And I think this is from when he said life everlasting.
Life. Life forever.
But then Kate's voice talks of Reinhardt as a murderer. So it seems to me that the echoed dialogue isn't random here. Reinhardt's cry for help and desire for life everlasting is countered with a spiritual judgment regarding his sin of murdering the crew of the Cygnus when he had them all part of the bottomized and turned into slaves. Next, Holland hears his own voice saying the black hole is pulling us in, and his line from earlier, we could also be dead. That line repeats here, and it makes him scream in terror. And yes, I would argue that the characters probably are now physically dead. That's right, my interpretation is that all the characters die in this film, and it's their souls that carry on this journey. Vincent hears the voices of himself and Bob, who is now dead, saying we're the best. That's not so much death-related, but we will be exploring the issues of technology and robot characters in a bit. Heiser hears a voice saying the black hole is pulling us in, and he hears his own line about Christmas morning from earlier in the film. Remember, Christmas is a positive spiritual event, and the so-called black hole itself is now tainted.
Hey, cool.
into a colourful light display. Now the camera twirls into the spinning eye of Kate. The stretching of her face here, funnily enough, can be considered a form of spaghettification, as physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson put it. Looks like you missed this little distortion metaphor. The dark pupil of her eye becomes the black hole. Remember the big black pupils of the technically dead crew? My take on this is that we are now entering the realm of the spirit, the realm of dream logic, hence travelling into a human eye and to the brain or soul within, as the windows to the soul, as they say. The next thing we see is the body of Reinhard floating in a nebulous void, but his hair and beard appear to have grown a lot longer, suggesting he has been floating for a very long time, months or maybe years. Well, he's alive, which would be impossible if this were the physical realm. So this is his soul we're seeing, not his body. And now he faces Max and the camera moves up into the dome of Max's head. Oh, by the way, Max was pretty much dead from being drilled in the chest and suddenly he's back to life, well, back to life in robot terms. So yeah, Reinhard faces Max and the camera moves up into the dome of Max's head, into Max's mind. And then Reinhard is encased inside Max, and they have become one. Max was already a representation of Reinhard's evil side from the moment he first appeared in the story. Both of them appeared from the shadows in the bridge scene. Both of them share power over the ship, and after initially dressing in deceptive white, Reinhard eventually changed to a red outfit for the rest of the story, as his own evil activities were revealed. Red, just like his devil robot alter ego Maximilian. The actor playing Reinhard was called Maximilian Shell, and there's a running joke in some online discussions that the Reinhard here is now encased in a Maximilian Shell. I also heard that the robot Maximilian character, his name was changed to a single L during the production to match the spelling of the actor's name. Anyway, in this ending, after Max and Reinhard become one, which they always wear symbolically, the fused character is seen perched on a sort of mountain shaped suspiciously like the robot design itself. It's like he's standing on his own statue. The pullout reveals the fires of hell and robed figures crossing bridges. Closer up, the robed figures have skull-like pale faces, not the metallic masks that we saw on the crew of the Cygnus. It seems pretty clear that the people crossing the bridges are the robed slaves of the crew of the Cygnus ship, who also used to walk across bridges to carry out their various duties. So basically, this whole scenario seems to be a representation of the Cygnus ship being the hell that Reinhard and his devil alter ego created and ruled over, their own kingdom of hell. Or we could consider that Reinhard is now imprisoned within Max for all eternity as a punishment. Then the sequence changes so that we're traveling through a shiny light-filled tunnel with a sort of church hall architecture, and we're flying toward the much promised light of the afterlife. A woman in a gown floats past, clearly looking like an angel heading to the light. Her hair is quite long, so I'm not sure if she is a representation of Kate, the ESP character, being a guide for the souls of the protagonists, but her hair is shorter. But anyway, the angel certainly seems to be a polar opposite of the Reinhard Maximilian devil character. The ship enters and emerges from a bright spiral of pretty pastel colours. Remember that some physicists have theorised that black holes suck matter out of one dimension and spit that matter back out either in another dimension or at the end of a wormhole that connects to some other part of the known universe. That ejection point would be bright because it's spitting back out the light and everything else that the black hole entrance had sucked in. The spinning here now slows and calms, and heavenly light shines into the probe. Dialogue wouldn't be appropriate here because dialogue links strongly to conscious perceptions of materialist reality. That was also the case in the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, getting away from verbal reality to access the rich sensory symbolism of the unconscious. Here in the black hole, we had some distorted cryptic dialogue on the end of the black hole, but it was echoes of previously spoken statements, and that was enough. Undoubtedly, the final shot of the film with the accompanying music is raising the same kind of transcendence feeling that was present in the opening shot of 2001: A Space Odyssey and in its ending, except the light present here is upside down compared to the one in 2001. In 2001, the spiritually reborn lead character in the form of the glowing star child arrived back at Earth at the very end of the film. In the black hole, I don't know if this is supposed to be Earth itself or a parallel dimension version of Earth or a brand new planet altogether. The characters did say at the start of the movie their mission was to find habitable life, strange term, which I assume means a habitable planet.
Its mission to discover habitable life in outer space. Same as ours.
Well, here it seems they found it. The probe ship and hence the protagonist head straight toward the brightest part of the present, where the ship fades into the light and the story ends. They reached a destination that was at the very least safe and the best and eternal paradise. Take your pick. By the way, the director himself in a pre-release interview talked about various possibilities regarding the ending, and he mentioned the parallel universe, but he doesn't commit to it. In fact, he refuses to explain the ending at all, even claiming that he and the production department intentionally leaked fake information about various ending scenarios, including characters winding up back on Earth among the dinosaurs or something like that. The fact that this planet or moon is kept mysterious, I think, helps the ending. To depict an afterlife paradise on screen would be self-defeating because such a realm would be beyond mortal comprehension. I mean, if the laws of time and space have become obsolete, how the hell can we relate to it? How can the afterlife be shown convincingly in a movie? Instead of being shown off during the sequence to establish a heaven-hell paradigm by which the main characters of the story are judged by their actions in mortal life. Yes, Black Hole isn't a science fiction film at heart, it's a spiritual story. In fact,
The thought horizon. Tech. Stepanek. Good kid.
arguably an even religious one. The scientific concept of black holes is merely device. And that's why scientific plausibility isn't here to very much in this movie, because it doesn't matter. It's not what the film's about. You could even call it a family horror movie, given the good themes. And seeing the film as a kid, I might find it scary in Star Wars. So the clues of spiritual narrative are all over the place in the film. I'm not saying all those clues are definitely consciously decided upon. If you've ever been involved in writing or directing a film and have them both yourself, then you'll sometimes only make creative decisions because those decisions feel right when you're on set. And that means there's a subconscious grasp of the core story themes that hasn't been very articulated in the mind of the filmmaker. But nevertheless, those feelings serve as an instinctive guide in making creative decisions. Conceptual artist Peter Allen Shaw, who worked on Black Hole, stated, quote, I think the design of the black hole came by working through my subconscious. This isn't necessarily a metaphysical thing, but when you think of space, how big it's big, we all contain little nebulas within ourselves, end quote. Well, it's quite a statement. I think it's said that the black hole filmmaker shot it at the beginning the way they did because they really show how well it. The shot choices and conceptual content is said beyond random. They often have to be consistent with the entire story, and the whole hundreds of spiritual themes discussed across the runtime. It all fits together quite well. And the one piece of production history info is that an effort was made to film an ending which involved footage of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, a clearly religious statement of some kind. But Disney executives didn't like the idea, and I think I probably agree with them on that. For one thing, kids would be confused by it, and secondly, it's too obviously religious. I think both the filmmakers and receptive audiences felt the spiritual themes of the black hole and enjoyed it for that reason. But the critics tasked with producing the film to show their summaries, and the material stewards mistakenly preoccupied with the idea that the movie is supposed to match physical reality. Those kinds of viewers closed themselves off and couldn't relate to the story. Well, films do the themes don't stop there. Another major issue which the film delves into is the role of technology in human society. For me, this is just as interesting as the spiritual ending. And once again, the presentation is symbolic. In fact, it's intertwined with spiritual themes. So let's go back to the start of the movie again and explore it on a different level. In the opening seconds of the film, we're moving forward through star-speckled space, and the music is very calm. But then computerized crosshair appears, and seemingly represents the x and y dimensions of time and space, and then more lines appear creating a grid pattern. This computer depiction of mathematically measured space prompts a dark change in music. So, space itself is calm, but the introduction of geometry prompts a sense of danger. We pan up to see the grid stretching to infinity, and we hover above and then below it, twisting our orientation at one point, and then we spiral into a geometrical tunnel, a representation of the black hole, of course. This whole geometry sequence is intentionally discomforting and maybe even implies a negative view of the mathematics-based perception of reality that we call science. The use of green lines, I think, relates to the fact that back in the 1970s and 80s, long before the invention of Windows software, most computer screens used green text against a black background. There's an interesting science behind the old green text color choice, by the way, which I won't go into here, but you can go read up on that yourself. The titles during the sequence also appear as if they are being typed onto the screen, again like the movie screen is a computer monitor. However, the words are typed in red, which in this movie seems to equate to evil, hence Maximilian is red, and we have a red fiery hell depicted inside the black hole. So in this title sequence, we already have digital technology being depicted in association with the danger of the black hole, a destructive force. 20 years later, the Matrix movie used the color green in association to computer text in its depiction of a digital techno prison. Initially, the grid is facing us dead on, and it has the appearance of a set of prison bars or a cage. And another strange subtlety is that the grid initially doesn't consist of squares, it consists of rectangles in the same dimensions as the movie frame. Now, given that 2001 Space Odyssey had its influences upon this film, the grid rectangles could be a reference to 2001's own concept of the scary monolith matching the cinema frame dimensions when turned on its side. See my video meaning of the monolith revealed for more about that? I'm far from certain about this in the black hole, though it's just an idea. Weirdly, as the sequence continues, the grid seems to morph from rectangles into square shapes. And something else strange that could be linked to 2001's monolith is that the grid pattern here doesn't fill the whole screen. At the top and bottom, there are two faint green lines forming a thinner and thus wider overall frame, and so that large interior rectangle, that one matches more closely with the dimensions of 2001's monolith, being 2001 was shot in a very wide Super Panavision 70 format. In this sequence, the geometric horizon is only seen within the top and bottom green lines. The thin portions of screen above and below are just space and stars. Now, maybe that framing has something to do with the graphical limitation of the now ancient software used to generate the geometrical sequence. I don't know. Well, it's worth noting anyway. One more thing, the geometry changes from rigid straight lines to circles as we go into the whole. And this in itself is a paradigm shift. If we think of the endless grid here as representing the known dimensions of our universe, then the whole clearly distorts and breaks those dimensions. Oh, by the way, the issue of straight lines in geometry seems to be a perceptual invention of man. The universe itself seems to, if we look at stars and solar systems and galaxies and so on, the universe seems to work more on the level of spirals and curves and round objects rather than straight lines. After the sequence, the first dialogue we hear is the robotic voice of Vincent reeling off some mathematical and technical jargon.
Pre-correction check. Rotation axis past 3 degrees. Rotate ignition sequence beginning in 30.
Vincent, notify me with 15 to go.
Run confirmation of the last inertial fixing check of the celestial quiz.
I have. It is correct.
The human voices join in with it, though we can see none of the characters yet, so actually we don't know yet that Vincent is a robot. Instead, we just have the technological Palomino ship approaching and giving off a threatening industrial hum as it gets close.
Mr. Pfizer?
Yes, Vincent?
Mr. Pfizer, I think you should come up here.
First view inside the ship, and we see that Vincent is a robot, a cartoonish-looking one. Vincent and his later sidekick Bob are technological anomalies in this narrative. So I'll just make the point right here, straight off, that Vincent and Bob, like the central droid characters of Star Wars, are only robots in surface plot appearance. Thematically, they are humans with their own emotions, ideology, ego, and even a lot of philosophical quotes from Vincent himself.
It is a saying that you can't unscramble eggs.
Penny's worth of philosophy. Right now is in a buy side of this now, Vincent.
A good offense is the best defense.
And what?
In fact, I would go as far as to say that the robots in this film, all of them, are basically representations of actual people. I'll expand upon this as we continue through the scenes. Here, the big black circle mid-set is itself a black hole and it dominates the room. It even has spiral lines inside, including one in green and one in red. Remember the green geometry and red text of the title sequence? Switch angle, more green geometry and red text in the computer displays. Vincent switches on the hologram showing the green hole, and from this we cut to Kate and Holland floating toward us in a very weird shot of technological pipes, lights and wireframes. A technological black hole, if you will. This ship doesn't exactly come across as cozy, does it? We never get to see any sleeping quarters or any other kind of comfortable space in the ship. There doesn't even seem to be any artificial gravity areas like these characters constantly live in zero gravity. So already technology is presented as a sort of a prison. There are lots of prison-like wire mesh parts of the set here, and light shining through grids to create crosshatch shadows. There's also some sort of black geometrical ball rotating beneath the hologram now. It's an interesting little touch. Our protagonists in zero gravity also float around this black hole simulation, as if they might fall into it. In some shots, there's a glowing green tunnel on the monitors, which seems to be a representation of the black hole again, like in the title sequence. Flying under the Cygnus ship, we get strong parallels with the opening geometry sequence. The Cygnus ship is a flat matrix of geometric lines, a variation on the geometric endless landscape. Like in the opening shot, we start above that landscape and dip below it. We even get the same music from the title sequence. So maybe it's like the technological Cygnus ship itself represents the threat of the unknown, like the black hole does, and it even appears initially as a black silhouette. Passing the end of the Cygnus, they get caught in the gravitational pull of the black hole, and Vincent goes outside to do repairs and he has some ESP contact with Kate. Like I said, the robots, especially Vincent, are essentially living human characters presented in robot form. How can a robot have ESP? Some of the human characters also seem to announce Vincent's human equivalent status here.
What the hell are you made of? What if one of us out there? Vincent is one of us.
He certainly is, he just has a different costume, so to speak. Now they dock on the Cygnus. The ship lights up first, and it's a matrix of scaffolding type geometry. Inside we get a fairly clear 2001 Space Odyssey reference in the form of this doorway. The technocratic prison field continues with geometric architecture and crisscross shadows. Then out into the ship's big central tunnel, a matrix of geometry again. Like I said, the techno threat of the Cygnus ship is presented as being equivalent to the black hole. Now Reinhardt's bug-eyed dark red robots appear with exaggerated stiffness of the limbs. They're like angry red ants serving their master without question. Another little thought I had here as well is that those guns, which, most guns that we see in movies, they have like the barrel on the top above the hand, but these ones have a sort of firing barrel mechanism above and below the hand, and in the hands of these robots, it almost makes them look like they've got claws. Maybe that's just a happy accident. Okay, so the visitors take a ride on a ship length tramline, and the journey is very much like the geometric version of the black hole, until itself is dark here too. More impressions of the ship is a geometric haunted house, and Vincent makes poignant statements here.
Some of my robots were assigned to Project Black Hole. Programs sent ESP messages back from space probes.
Also, ancient history, Vincent.
Not to me, Mr. Booth. Not this close.
In other words, robots such as himself, who are arguably equivalent to human souls given their ESP and full spectrum of human emotions, they were treated as expendable slaves by the human scientist masters. This parallels Reinhardt sending lobotomized crew members on probe missions into the black hole as well. In other words, Reinhardt's madness isn't confined. It's a feature of human civilization. It's also unusual in science fiction that a robot would be intellectually distrusting of scientists. Heading into the bridge of the ship, more overwhelming geometry and another tunnel journey panning upwards toward a geometric funnel. It's like they're already entering the black hole just by going up to the bridge. The set they encounter is quite bizarre. More geometry, of course, this time the interior of a giant dome with yet more geometric patterning. I don't know what the big orange ball thing is, but it reminds me of the hot meteors that smash the ship later on. Maybe this is an intended foreshadow of that threat. And yet there's a half sphere in blue, which seems to be an opposing force of some kind, as in opposing to the orange ball. The black hole itself is blue until it is entered and becomes red. So yeah, I don't really know exactly what these things are supposed to be, but the effort was made to put them in there, they must represent something. Before the dialogue begins here, we have the general impression of a technocratic world. Everything is geometric computer panels with mindless figures going about their duties as if they are automated parts of those machine systems. This wide shot has a giant shiny black floor with a pit in the center that parallels the black hole itself, which is seen through a window in the background in the same shot. Note that the pit has a bluish tint with red in the center, just like the black hole appears in those same colours. Now we meet Max and then Reinhardt, the twin impressive forces running the ship. Dark red Max with a single red eye is technological oppression itself, the devil in a cyclops robot form. Reinhardt is the deceptive human version of Max, conveying himself as a great scientific explorer. The director Guy Nelson said in an interview prior to the film's release for Media Scene that Reinhardt is, quote, cast in the mold of Werner von Braun, end quote. Werner von Braun was an anti-scientist who continued to work on space research for the United States after World War II ended. He didn't face trial, instead he was put in charge of future resources and manpower in America instead. So it seems that the director was making a point that Reinhardt is entitled to have some of that Nazi spirit himself, and the name Reinhardt is a German origin. By the way, director Guy Nelson had a TV show a couple of years earlier called Washington Behind Closed Doors. I've not seen it, but apparently it's about the political scandal. So clearly the director had some interest in political issues, and had already directed a political story. No wonder the black hole ended up having an anti-technocratic side to it. Reinhardt makes a statement here that is thematic on two levels. Reinhardt makes a statement here that an anti
Robertson.
technocratic side to it. Reinhardt makes a statement here that is thematic on two levels.
Now, Maximilian, calm down. Don't think of small people.
First, Vincent is supposed to be a robot plot-wise, not a person, and second, Reinhardt's phrase, small people, reflects his attitude toward the whole group. He considers himself a scientific god. When talking to Kate McRae, he uses his finger and talks like a hypnotist, with his eyes lit by a mysterious light. Note that his techno throne and the steps to it are dark red, like Maximilian's. I suppose that throne area is kind of like his mountain in the end sequence. Reinhardt is also associated to the black hole itself visually in multiple shots, like he is the black hole. He makes a statement about the Cygnus resisting the pull of the black hole.
We have anti-gravity forces. It's what you might call a Mexican standoff.
The funny enough, Vincent and Max have their own Mexican standoff in the same scene. Just seems like a very odd dialogue parallel there. On his own computer panel is another green wireframe simulation of the black hole tunnel. It's a bit different to what we saw earlier on the Palomino. In fact, this one looks a lot more like a side view of the wireframe version we saw in the title sequence. Now we get a sort of scenes of the crew making their way about the ship to collect spare parts, and some of them sneaking off to try and find out what's really going on. And something that is frequently present in the geometry is a pyramid triangle with a separated apex. Now, that's classic conspiracy imagery, isn't it? And the same visual metaphor seems to be strong here. A pyramid hallway with a light at the apex. The slave worker quarters all have pyramid-shaped entrances minus the apex. One of the most critically protested features of this movie is its surreal ending. Our protagonist is sucked into the black hole and ends up in a lot of philosophical quotes from Vincent himself.
Reinhardt sure loves to play God, doesn't he?
Here too. And this movie didn't need any actual flights to be shown at all. By the way, director Guy Nelson had a hit TV show called Scientific God. When talking to, I suppose that's thrown area. On his own computer panel is another green wireframe simulation of the black hole's more backbone. It's apex. Same visual metaphor, and the capstone is for the rule of Reinhard. The entrances minus the capstones, and the capstone is for the rule of Reinhard, of course. And there are no actual doors, so no privacy for the workers. Inside one of these rooms, there are surreal artworks. I'm not sure what's going on in them, but there appears to be bits of industrial techno gadgetry as part of the images. We get US flags on the jackets here too. And this movie didn't need any national flags to be shown at all, and the protagonists didn't have any flags on their own costumes or in their ship. So with all those pyramid metaphors, it seems that there's a reference being made to the famous seal of the dollar bill. Remember, the director previously directed a movie about the Watergate scandal, so he had a political edge to him already. If you're still not convinced on the conspiracy dollar bill pyramid imagery, then look at this. Holland sees a funeral taking place beneath the pyramid with a capstone and a lit apex. Now, there are plenty of movies that depict pyramid, the capstone imagery in relation to corrupt power. A Clockwork Orange had it in spades, but I like that the black hole features it as part of a geometric visual style. It really brings out the anti-technocratic theme of the film, because after all, space movies aren't really about space. Real space movies would be boring as hell, a lot of unfathomable blackness and hardly any planets that a human can live on. Space movies are usually just surrealist representations of life on Earth, planets as countries, space itself as our own vast oceans, or our own skies, aliens themselves as foreign enemies, and sorts of other variations on such symbols. Moving on, Reinhardt shows more of his scientist ego.
It's about time that people learn about their failures and my successes.
Typical technocrats, he considers himself inherently superior to others, which is a form of elitism that overlaps with Nazism and other superiority complex ideologies. Harry enters this room, which has more geometry. He takes a close look at one of the apparently robotic workers who will be revealed later to be the human crew enslaved. The reflective face mask is a nice dramatic touch. Harry being reflected in that mask, I think, is suggestive of the human trapped behind it. And perhaps it's even suggestive that Harry and the crew might wind up the same. That is, if they get lobotomized too. The distorted set reflection is also suggestive of the time and space distortion that will occur in the black hole. The masks are one of the more iconic images from this movie. These human characters being unseen and unheard very much ties in with the technocracy theme. People being reduced to nothing more than workers has been a long ambition of technocrats going way back in history. In fact, we used to just call it slavery. The technocracy study course proposal released in 1931 by a rather deluded and cold-hearted group of scientists is quite an eye-opener.
That Reinhardt sure loves to play God, doesn't he?
Now we get a bit of Reinhardt ego stroking.
You define the power of the black hole with your anti-gravity calculations. That's an achievement, sir. You think so? Yes. I do. Thank you.
Then a bit more ideological talk from Vincent, and then he makes a statement that confirms he identifies as human.
I don't sound superior, but I hate goddamn robots.
In the shooting gallery, we get personal conflict between the free-thinking, human-minded good guy robots and the speechless guard robots of the Cygnus. The guards may not speak, but one of their leaders clearly conveys ego and emotion.
You would be again, won't you?
It's the old classic metaphor of robot workers in science fiction representing human workers or human soldiers, so mind control that they've effectively lost their humanity in terms of appearance and in terms of programmed behaviour. So it's not just a kiddie fun scene, it's a continuation of the technocracy theme. Now Reinhardt hosts an opulent dinner, like he's king of the castle. You'd think he might have some nice paintings of Earth here, but instead he has a portrait of his own ship. Easy to overlook in the scene is the presence of the mind-controlled slave workers as waiters. There's a painting of a human in the background here, but it's difficult to make out who it is. Reinhardt himself is framed in some shots here with the black hole spinning around his head. So once again, he seems to be equated with the black hole, like he is a monumentally dark and destructive force. As is often the case with mad scientists, there are those who fall for the hypnotic persona and the grand promises. In this case, it's Durant who falls under the spell, and he rejects all evidence presented regarding the dark side of his cult leader.
That tiny little one-man dragon of his is big enough to feed an army. Nothing strange about it. It purifies the air. Oh.
The strange objection he makes is this, and it seems to be bad scripting.
Granted, 20 years out of contact with people has made us men a little eccentric, but you can't ask me to believe that he's programmed his robots to feel emotions. Come on.
But we already know that Vincent and Bob feel emotions, and we saw a guard robot having an ego in the gallery scene. But again, I consider the robots to be symbolic humans in metal clothing as they often are in science fiction. Now Bob explains that the crew have been effectively turned into robots.
These poor creatures are what's left of the crew. They're more robot than human.
We could take away this plot point and ask why Reinhardt would need humans to be turned into half robots when he could just use the actual robot crew. But all this stuff is symbolic anyway. The notion of turning humans into robots who lack free will is a metaphor for brainwashing and slavery that happens in real life. The faceless stormtroopers of Star Wars who lack humanity, free will, and individual identity, they represent the same thing. They were extensions of the will of Darth Vader and the Emperor, and the black hole human robot hybrid crew are extensions of the will of Reinhardt himself. Regarding Vincent and Bob as humanoid minds in robot form, Bob makes a very humanistic statement here.
The most valuable thing in the universe. Intelligent life means nothing to Dr. Reinhardt.
We see Kate now wrapped in tinfoil, no special effects expense spared there, and what happens to be the beginning of a sort of lobotomy process. But I think a bit more explanation of how the crew have been physically and mentally transformed would have helped the story a bit more. I mean, how do you remove the human will without damaging the intellect to the point that they are useless as workers as well? Oddly, the one robot creation that Reinhardt is unable to control is Maximilian. Being the Max's fuse with Reinhardt data, I suppose we could think of Max as a representation of Reinhardt's subconscious edges towards violence and depression. The old sci-fi movie Forbidden Planet did a good job of exploring that concept, and that was sort of the plot level in that movie. Dark subconscious edges manifesting as uncontrollable technology. Did a good job of exploring that concept. The old sci-fi movie
Maximilian
Forbidden Planet did a good job of exploring that concept, and that was sort of
It's a good movie, Forbidden Planet. It's what's his name? Leslie Nielsen.
plot level in that movie. Dark subconscious edges manifesting as uncontrollable technology. Reinhardt is crushed by one of his own monitors, crushed by components of his own technological vision, and nobody is
Does he have the white hair? Good movie. The Tempest in space.
able to help because he has destroyed everything human around him as well. As Reinhardt's vision collapses, his own ship and all technology within it begins to crumble. The hot meteors and red lighting make the place start to look like a domain of evil, which it already was. Some of the crew fight their way through the food garden, the part of the ship that is the least technological and therefore the most humane, but the breaching of the hull causes the place to freeze over rapidly. So again, environmental transformation. Stripping away the illusion. When Max and Vincent face off in a battle, there seems to be a parallel with the lobotomy procedure. Max electrocutes Vincent and his head rises up to reveal his lit up brain, which starts spinning. It's almost like a spinning black hole thing there, maybe. It appears to be a robot's equivalent to the lobotomy, but Vincent manages to get out of it. Now Bob dies, and he has a heartbeat that slows and stops as if he's organic.
My main circuits mode, and both mechanisms are failing.
He even talks of his own death in the spiritual terms, and finishes with a statement of ego and emotional trait.
But part of me goes with you. You'll never be obsolete. We're the best.
Reinhardt thought he was the best too.
We're the best with you. You'll never be
Trait.
But part of me goes with you. You'll never be obsolete. We're the best.
Reinhardt thought he was the best too. But anyway, our main characters make it through the black hole spiritual dimension jump, and Vincent, who wouldn't have a soul if he was a robot, makes the same journey as if he does have a soul. The Reinhardt Max hybrid is seen perched on top of a crude statue of itself, dominating all the slaves, and it seems we have the control pyramid and power apex metaphor there again. The self-statue impression captures the ultimate driving motive behind any cult-like leader: self-worship, ego. And isn't that the core of any technocratic philosophy? Mistaking thyself for God, but actually being more akin to the devil. Alright, that wraps up my analysis of this criminally underrated movie. It has its flaws, but it has enough good themes and touches of originality that the flaws can be overlooked. It was very ambitious in conceptual scope and in special effects requirements. A great effort was made, but the film almost feels like a rough cut at times. There's been talk for years of a possible remake, with new script versions apparently having been written already. Modern special effects could really give this story a boost, as long as they're not overused, and perhaps even a Star Wars style CGI touch-up of the original could work wonders. Personally, I'd really like to see a remake and have some ideas for how the story could be improved and expanded. But first I'm going to pitch you some of my paid content. Over at my website, which is called latestlearning.com, I've got hundreds of videos and articles that are not available for free online. They're paywall items. You place your orders by PayPal or credit card, and then you receive download links for whatever it is you've ordered. Also, I have a Patreon page for those of you who can't afford the downloads, and you can get access to quite a bit of my material there as well, extra material that's not available for free, and that one involves becoming a monthly supporter, contributing a small amount each month. I also now have merchandise available on my site as well. T-shirts, mugs, if you're into that type of thing. Alright, so let's get back to the black hole. And like I said, this movie could really do with a good remake, and I have lots of ideas to suggest about that. The first thing is to give the human characters more personality and stronger personal story arcs. The problem with the original is that from the outset the crew mostly get along too well with each other. Remember in Alien, the crew had all kinds of personal conflicts and divisions right from the beginning of the film. Hardly anyone got on with each other. That helped the Alien movie so much because it made the characters feel a lot more real, and it gave more drama. The black hole story does involve some personal conflicts later, such as Harry abandoning ship and leaving the others stranded, and Durant falling for Reinhardt's scientific breakthrough promises. But I think all that stuff would have worked better if those personal ideological differences existed from the outset in an emphasized way. Some scenes dedicated to presenting these character clashes before the black hole was even shown in the movie. I think that would have been the better way to go. One weakness for me of the existing film is that the rescue of Kate Holland lacks drama. I don't mean the clunky wrestling with a stiff robot. I mean the fact that the film hasn't given us enough reason to care about Kate. We don't know enough about her to care much about her predicament. There is a character point of hers about her wanting to know what happened to her missing father, who was on the original Cygnus mission, and later she learns that he's dead. But all that comes too late in the story when other more interesting things are going on. So a very early scene that shows how the traumatic loss of her father and not knowing his fate has almost ruined her life, I think that would have really helped her storyline. At the same time, Captain Holland doesn't have much going on personally. So I was thinking that if he had an underplayed father substitute for Kate, and perhaps even a private romantic involvement that is against their employer protocol, that would add emotional depth to both characters and would give strong dramatic weight to Holland rescuing Kate later. Actually in the film he sort of pecks her on the cheek in an uncomfortable moment straight after the rescue. Like the filmmakers couldn't decide whether to go with the love interest angle or not. Being that Harry betrays the crew later, trying to escape without them, I think having some personal inner conflicts on his part would give weight to his betrayal. Particularly if Harry was shown early in the film to have an overwhelming phobia of death itself, then his desperation to avoid going into the black hole would make his betrayal of the crew more relatable. One good way of establishing this would be to give him a life-threatening health problem from the outset, such as a weak heart, which he constantly worries about. Maybe he could leave the mission because his wife had died and he's trying to escape the pain of death, something like that. Give him some background history that shows that he's terrified of death and therefore terrified of the black hole. With Durant, a stronger early story emphasis on his life self-confidence could give weight to his rapid worship of Reinhardt's intellect. Perhaps having already in all of Reinhardt's published books on science, and maybe even having a big grief stricken his academic hero has been missing for 2 decades. So he already considers Reinhardt God among men, and then he finds out that he's actually on a mission to go to Reinhardt's ship, and to him that's just a wonderful thing. With the young character called Kaiser, I think it would help for him to have been torn between an adventurous desire to go on a journey into the black hole and having a youthful rebellion streak whereby he wants to make his own decisions and choose his own path. This could put him into personal conflict with Captain Holland at the start of the film, and I could give him a love-hate attitude to Reinhardt later on, who was also a rebel of sorts. As the story unfolds, Kaiser matures, learning to embrace his individuality and yet tempers his own ego. Maybe even giving him an exceptionally strong, unfocused intellect could put him into dynamic conflict with Reinhardt as well. Something else I was thinking that could be interesting for the entire crew is that their initial mission is to take various readings of the black hole from different positions millions of miles apart, but it's later revealed that their real mission, which they never told of, was to search for Reinhardt's ship on account of the transmission that had been sent away by the robot character Bob after the crew were lobotomized. That would also expand Bob's role in the narrative. Perhaps an even better plot twist could be that the lobotomization process was developed by the funders of the Cygnus mission as a sort of contingency against the possibility of crew mutiny. But Reinhardt put that program into action anyway to serve his agenda. So learning about this high-level endorsement of the robotic slave human process, the Palomino crew loses trust in their own airspace chain of command, as well as getting into conflict with Reinhardt. And then the mission objective, lacking credibility, this in turn would make the personal differences between the crew play out more freely, because each of them would begin choosing their own path, their own destiny, and deciding their own mission. And lacking the trustworthy Earth command would make the characters feel much more alone in the universe and lead up to getting sucked into the black hole. It's like, you know kids. With the robot character Vincent, I think he gets a bit too much admiration from the crew from the outset of the movie, so I think the good story after him would be that he is sort of treated as part of the furniture by the Palomino crew to begin with, which would be a nice parallel to Reinhardt's attitude to his robot crew on his ship. As the story progresses, Vincent begins to display more and more of his human-like personality and begins to earn respect from the Palomino crew. He goes from being expendable to being valued as equivalent to a human. That would also give much more dramatic weight to his interactions with the fellow robots Bob, who is experiencing similar even worse treatment on Cygnus. And the other nice touch would be that instead of having ESP skills openly on display at the start of the film, Vincent is revealed to have them much later, even though he's not programmed to have them. So there would be a big question over his character throughout the movie. Is he just a robot, or is he actually a proper conscious entity, the equivalent of a soul? Regarding the events on the Cygnus ship, some more backstory about how Reinhardt took over and why he did so. I think that helps the story. Perhaps some recorded surveillance footage from recordings of the murders and lobotomies could be shown to the crew by Bob, who secretly recorded it all. This will allow us to see some of these prior events. Further explanation of how Cygnus crew physically changes to mind the slaves help a great deal. And I was thinking that imperfections in the transformation process could add interesting dynamics. Maybe one or two crew members retain their autonomy, breaking their programming and assisting the Palomino crew to defeat Reinhardt by sabotaging some of his security systems, even reprogramming some of Reinhardt's guards to go against him. I don't mean so much overt rebellion from them, but subtle defiance that seems to be driven by subconscious remnants of their former free will. And one way that could work very well at the plot level is that the surveillance systems on the ship could be so intense, so overwhelming at the beginning that the human characters seem to have very little chance of being able to fight back against Reinhardt in any way because they've just been watching track everywhere they go. But the rebellion from the lobotomized crew sabotages some of those systems and gives our lead characters an edge, gives them a way of fighting back. The overly stiff movements of the guard robots in the existing film combined with their bad aim and stupidity, I think takes a lot of drama out of the battle scenes. These robots are easy to beat. So I certainly have the design for the toughest and worst perhaps some crew having maintained slave legs and rested armed guards could give a better dynamic. So during the laser fights, our heroes actually killing some of the lobotomized crew members. However, I still have some action robots in the story for the sake of keeping in memorable robots using our scenario and visual variety. In the existing movies, there's a good idea that is quite capitalized on, but the characters pretend to be slave raiders. Reinhardt's seen this and tells the robots to tackle the humans in the ship. But if the side effect including one of the more dramatic involved tactics, and actually seeing robots killing people slaves as well by Reinhardt, that would feel dramatic as well. That itself could be something that causes backlash among the remaining slaves. As for Reinhardt, I think his character's fine in the original films, and really seems to expand his role. With Max Lino, obviously he and the other robots could do with an overall physical redesign. I was thinking that Max could appear in a much more human looking form, but I think he was larger than human, and that seems to change as he transforms from robots into terrifying robots. That happens with every movie back then. And this character would be humans take on and remaining high on 6 years, seeing fruits on. How being a much larger ship with an indoor forest a mile wide that generates fresh ongoing oxygenation for the ship. This additional character could be living off the land of that forest to avoid the ship's surveillance systems, and his overhead existence become part of a sort of evolutionary regression to a primitive caveman state. Perhaps such a subplot would be too much of a distraction, but it's an example of how much scope there is for an expansion of the black hole original plot. By the way, the black hole is a bit unusual in that most movies have a central character, but this movie doesn't have one. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There are other classic movies that lack an absolute central character, such as the Vikings and Doctor Strangelove. This made me realise that I'd like to see more movies where multiple characters share the central important role. I think it makes the audience have to consider multiple points of view of the story, so I probably want to keep that factor in the black hole remake. Regarding the presentation of the black hole itself, I don't think it changes change it too much. It's visually far more interesting and stimulating than the black hole scenes of Interstellar. Keep the swell and stellar debris presentation, and maybe explain to the audience a bit more. Perhaps a good approach could be for characters to discuss early in the film the rich variety of black hole types that have been discovered in this future setting, including ones that fall outside of 21st century real-world physicists' opinions, and that the one they encounter in the story is a unique type, a mini black hole with some unusual qualities that defy real-world black hole theories. By doing this, the black hole can be given visual traits that are more filmable and more dramatic, and without people claiming that's not realistic. That's what happens after they enter the black hole. CGI allows for anything really, but I do think it would need to be significantly different to the original ending to avoid audience disappointment. Keep the rich symbolism but expand upon meanings. I was thinking that each character could have their own unique experience of the dimension jump, starting with something personally terrifying to them, and then leading to a personal representation of salvation. Maybe one person could find themselves stood on a hard, featureless floor, lit by a mysterious spotlight, and everything around them is utter blackness and silence, no matter where they try to run. Someone else could get spaghettified, as the undergrads try to put it, but they don't actually die from it. And another person gets crushed by gravitational forces into a tiny ball, but somehow they're still alive. So it would all come off as distortions of perception instead of actual physical phenomena. Maybe Maximilian could show up as part of the hallucinations or where they are. He could show up to terrorize the characters in various nightmare forms, such as being 1,000 times bigger. And the characters could encounter their own gravestones, wondering about whether they're actually dead, or they could see themselves dead as an out-of-body experience. Lobotomization could show up in the end sequence in some form. In other words, a highly surrealist impression of everything that happened before the end of the black hole could take place, but each of the characters is alone in the void to begin with, torn away from each other, and the salvation is finding each other again and perhaps reconnecting with organic nature. Maybe a surrealist forest of some kind. There's endless possibilities, but I think the lack of dialogue approach from the original ending would be best being kept. Alright, so there you have it. I think the black hole absolutely should be remade. The story and characters being expanded would be a first priority for me, and then improved special effects a second priority. I think there's so much scope for what can be done with this story. I hope you've enjoyed this video. You've been listening to Rob Ager of CollegiateLearning.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, the criminally underrated movies, and check out these other ones I've done on the likes of Star Trek: Motion Picture, Red Dawn, and Psycho 2. And there's going to be more coming in the series in the future as well. Until next time.